All right, we have our counter arguments against universal reconciliation. Argument, universal reconciliation makes our choices insignificant since we all end up in the same place. There are no consequences for sin. If I'm going to end up the same place Hitler's going to end up, then what does it matter? Well, the response from a universalist might be, well, just because God will redeem everything in the end doesn't mean our choices don't matter. I mean, after all, some are going to go through a very difficult process of purification and purgation to prepare them for salvation. And their choices factor into that, what that process is and what it takes and how long it takes. Another argument, Jesus taught that the way to salvation is narrow, but universalism puts everybody on the path to salvation. Response, Jesus also said that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter heaven. Well, that sounds like there's not going to be any rich people in heaven, right? Well, he also says, but with God, all things are possible. So the way to salvation may be a narrow road, but that doesn't mean that God's grace is not sufficient to bring us through it. Argument. People won't want to be saved if we don't preach eternal conscious torment. So you know where that's coming from, right? Response. If it's a lie, we shouldn't teach it. If we don't believe that Jesus is good enough news, then we aren't sincere believers, but we're just trying to avoid punishment. The universalist is going to say that Jesus is enough, right? We don't have to frighten people with bad news. Jesus is good enough news. Knowing the source of goodness, the creator of all things, the one who loved us enough to die for us, to redeem us, to save us, to heal us, that's enough. We don't have to also warn people about God burning them forever. Another counter-argument. The punishment or fire that the New Testament describes is called eternal. It is not temporary. And this is something I suppose that a conditionalist or a traditionalist might say. Response. Well, the Greek word that's translated eternal is aionios, and it's a word which could be understood to mean of the age. Universalists often understand it to refer to the age to come. So it's not a fire that's eternal, it's a fire that's of the future age. So it has to do with this coming age where everything is sort of prepared for its ultimate purpose, right? And so you'll notice, that word aionios there, you may notice that the word aeon is in there, or eon, we might say, an age. Now, there are, of course, counters to this that you're going to hear from traditionalists and conditionalists, but that can be your homework if you'd like to look at it more deeply. Another counter-argument. Universalism doesn't make sense because people are free to reject God, right? If people have to be free to reject God, then that means that it's not possible that everyone's going to be saved because some people are just going to resist. Response, and this is actually a really interesting response. Humans were made to be completed by God. If God continues to extend grace and gives us eyes to see, all of us will eventually see the light and choose against our own self-destruction. To do otherwise would be insanity, and no insane person is truly free to make their own decisions. That's an interesting argument, right? That's a popular argument from an Eastern Orthodox theologian who holds to universal reconciliation named David Bentley Hart, and I'll reference his book later if you want to look it up. But it's really a really fascinating argument that those who would choose death and destruction and to pull themselves away from the source of goodness would have to be insane. And if you're insane, you're not really free. So any free person is also going to choose God. Interesting, huh? Another counter-argument. Universalism takes passages that seem universal out of their context. For instance, 1 Corinthians 15:22 says that in Christ all will be made alive, but the next verse limits all to only those who belong to Christ. All right, so it doesn't really mean all the time. Response from Universalist, well, all humans are made by God. All things were made by Christ and for Christ, and God will get what he wants in the end, which is the restoration of all things. So yes, all belong to Christ. Another counter-argument. Universalism has been denied by traditional Christian teaching, so it's out of bounds. Response. While it has not been prominent in Western Christianity, a number of respected Eastern Church Fathers held to the view, such as Origen and Gregory of Nyssa. Gregory of Nyssa, incidentally, also had significant influence at the Council of Nicaea and had a role in shaping the Nicene Creed, which is basically the primary Orthodox creed. When I say Orthodox, meaning the primary creed that all believing Christians who believe the traditional Christian faith hold to. So basically, it's the definitional creed of Christianity. It's the Orthodox, the right believing creed. And Nyssa was involved in writing it, and he was a Universalist. There are even some Catholic theologians, Peter Kreeft, Hans Urs von Balthasar, for example, who have argued that their church technically leaves the door open for what they would call hopeful universalism. And the distinction there is they wouldn't teach universalism dogmatically, but they would say that there really isn't anything in Catholic teaching that requires that anybody has to be in hell. It's a danger, it's a threat, it's something that could happen, but God could also choose to enlarge his grace so much that nobody has to go there. And that's hopeful universalism. That basically, based on God's good character, we can't teach it dogmatically, but we believe and we think and we hope that everyone will be saved. And so you do have within Catholicism and in Eastern Orthodoxy some pretty significant heavyweight theologians who have been open, at least, to universalism. Another argument. The Bible is full of warnings about death, destruction, and fiery punishment language. Universalism ignores these warnings. It's largely coming, I think, from the annihilationist viewpoint, right? Response. There are soft forms of universalism that simply teach that everyone goes to heaven when they die, but apokatastasis takes the biblical data seriously. It's just that we think that the fiery language points to purification, not torture or ultimate destruction. And now we've dealt with universal reconciliation. In the next section, we'll look at some of the biblical terms that are behind your English Bibles and how understanding what they mean can help us to navigate these waters maybe a little bit better.